Welcome in, Wrestling Matt. I am can't know that right below. We got a studio audience somewhere in the area. I clearly excited about today's episode. I thank you for being with us here at the WrestlingMatchShow.com. As always, it's right above top if you're watching. But if to those of you listening to the podcast, welcome to the show.com. If you're watching with your eyes and go, wait, I can let's do some podcast form. Yes, you can. Podcast, rate, review, subscribe. Please do that. On our YouTube channel, WrestlingMatchShow.com. Hey, leave a comment down below. Leave a comment in the chat. Whatever it may be, we want to hear from you. We want to hear what you think about today's subject. The top 5 wrestlers of the year so far as we sit here in the back half of September. I know the PWI 500 came out and all that stuff, and you arguing about it, and people didn't make the list, and people were forgotten, and all that stuff. That criteria, out the window. Not what we're doing here today. This is based on who I think is having the best year. It's not about wins and losses necessarily. This is about presentation. This is about character. This is what gets me to tune in. Who makes me sit up and watch? This is me from my standpoint of working in the business, of being a fan for 35 years. Who's catching my eye? Who makes me sit up and watch? Who makes me tune in? Who do I seek out to go watch? That's what we're talking about today. Moderators are keeping an eye on this chat, so certainly get your thoughts in. But leave them down below. Leave them in the comments if you're watching after the fact. Come on over from the podcast. Leave us your thoughts. Head over to the WrestlingMatchShow.com. Go over to the community tab, which, by the way, you may find as a Matt member a promo code to get a discount on Wrestling Matt shirts at ProWrestlingTees.com/TheWrestlingMatt. Yes, we do have shirts there if you want the discount. Some of you have it already. Some of you have purchased shirts. I appreciate that. But how could you get that discount right here? Head over to the WrestlingMatchShow.com. Go over to the membership tab. Whether you're listening on podcasts right now, whether you're watching after the fact. We start at $2.99 right above Todd. That'll get you discounted merch. That'll get you that code. Also have members-only live chat coming up. You get to the Matt Camper level at $6.99 a month. You get all those perks. In addition to that, you'll get member shout-outs. You get members-only videos. We're going to be doing a live react next week to the Mr. McMahon Netflix documentary. We're going to be watching a random episode of Raw, SmackDown, or Dynamite. That's also happening probably in the next week or so. And if you go to the Matt event level at $24.99, all the perks I just mentioned at the first 2 levels, we're going to connect with you on social media. Somebody at this level is going to win a private Zoom with me for 30 minutes. We do special watch-alongs quarterly. We're going to watch a private past wrestling event. And by that, I mean someone's going to get to pick it. We're going to watch it here on the channel. And that is all coming your way if you become a member right here at the Wrestling Matt. So as we talk now about my top 5 wrestlers of the year so far, I wanted to get to some honorable mentions. Not an easy list to pare down. Not topping, but part of my honorable mentions, I'm putting Chad Gable on here. I had referenced the other day that I thought he might make the list. He just misses the list. There's 2 guys that were very close to making the list that I left off. Chad Gable's one of them. I think the work that Chad Gable has done this year is some of the best of his career. Not some. It is the best of his career. His character work is excellent this year. His power-hungry change when he was not able to win the Intercontinental Championship, not only from Gunther, but more importantly from Sami Zayn, when he suplexed Sami Zayn out of his wife's arms in Montreal and shifted who he was and turned Otis into a huge star once again with his actions. surprisingly never winning the Intercontinental Championship. Obviously, they had other plans with Sami and Braun Breaker, or wherever they're going to go from there. But I think Chad Gable has more than proven his worth. People talking about, this guy needs a push or she needs a push. Pushes are consistent storylines, consistent usage, multiple segment matches, being used all the time. Chad Gable has been that. Chad Gable has been I'd even call him one of the main characters of Monday Night Raw for the entire year. Chad Gable was tasked with battling Gunther, coaching Sami Zayn, battling Sami Zayn, becoming the power-hungry bully of Alpha Academy, making Otis into the lovable, beaten down underdog that we know he can be. The reactions he was getting from the stuff he did with Chad, which I honestly believe there was more left, and maybe they'll get to that. To creating American Made, to be able to help get the Wyatts where they needed to be. That was Chad Gable's task. Hey, we're putting a lot into this new group. They need a foil. And it's Chad Gable. And Chad Gable got a new group out of it. Maybe we lost the Chad Gable Otis stuff along the way. I do believe that there was something left there. Maybe they'll get back to that. But everything Chad Gable has been asked to do, he not only does it, but he does it at a high level. He has made the most of his minutes. We know he's a great wrestler. That's never been in question. He's a great example, though, of great wrestler does not mean great pro wrestler. He's always been good in the ring. He's always had great matches. He's found himself on the microphone, both as a goofy heel, as a serious heel, as a baby face. They have put him in so many different positions, and he's been able to hit it out of the park no matter what. Very hard leaving Chad Gable off my top 5. I hemmed and hawed about this next one a lot, and I'm going to get a lot of backlash for it, and I understand it. I left Will Ospreay off my top 5. If I made this list a bunch of times, he probably ends up on it. Everybody else on this list, I think, has a little bit more of a complete body of work. Any other year, Ospreay's absolutely in the top 5 with the work he's done, from Danielson to Swerve to Roderick Strong to MJF multiple times. I have been so happy with how Will Ospreay has transitioned into a weekly television wrestler. I think he's actually only going to get better. I think he's needed that character building like he has gotten from dumping Danielson on his head with the Tiger Driver, to not pulling the trigger against Swerve, to not pulling the trigger initially against MJF before he was able to hit it in Wembley to get that victory. Will has cut some of the best promos of his career. I think he is a important babyface for AEW. I think he is someone that does make you sit up and watch. And as I said, very hard leaving him off this list. We'll stay in AEW. Willow Nightingale, I think, has had the best year of her career. Initially being paired with Stokely and Chris. I think she's broken through some barriers in AEW that maybe they didn't expect. She was tasked with having Mercedes Moné's first match back, and they had a damn good one, which was more of a backdrop to the Willow and Chris feud. The street fight, they had it all out, was excellent. Her stuff with Stokely and Chris, from both a comedy standpoint when they were together, and then more of a rivalry feud standpoint, has been very good. She's super over with the crowd. Her work has gotten better by the week. One of my favorite people to watch I think at times she might be the most natural baby face in all of pro wrestling. You throw in the conglomeration, which brings me to Mark Briscoe. And obviously, it's different for Mark Briscoe without his brother. It had been a battle, I think, as people know, to get the Briscoes on AEW proper television. Mark Briscoe being able to come back after his brother's death to fight through what I am sure was unbelievable emotional pain for him and his family. Took some time off. I think he was a bit banged up, but then has come back and has become just such a bright light of AEW in an infectious personality, a promo that is unlike anyone else. Basically, a group created out of thin air with him and Kyle and Orange, all very likable people who have different energy, but it's just come together well. And adding Ishii over the summer and adding Willow and all that and the word of the day and the fact that conglomeration's now a thing. Sometimes the best stuff in wrestling happens by mistake. And you figure out chemistry. You figure out that, hey, all these people should be on camera together. And obviously Mark is a great worker and Ring of Honor champion and all that stuff. But he is one of those people that people can't hide their love for. Because when you hear his music or you see him or you hear his promos, there is a magnetism to him. You hear it on commentary when he comes out. Tony Schiavone is unable to hide how much he and others love Mark Briscoe, as has Taz, as has Excalibur, as has Ian Riccaboni and Caprice Coleman. You can't dislike Mark Briscoe. And he matches all of his energy and his promos with what he does in the ring. He is probably one of the most naturally over people in all of wrestling because of his personality. And to be able to become this singles wrestler, because, Jay was the AEW world champion. Was the ROH world champion. He kind of broke off more as the singles guy. But Mark has been getting that chance and making the most of that chance in his brother's memory. I think there's something special when we see Mark Briscoe on television. There's something that just seems like it's supposed to be pro wrestling. I think he embodies everything good about pro wrestling. I think he embodies a character that just screams pro wrestling. That is very much him. That everything he does makes you smile or laugh or get involved or be a bit more interested. There's another guy that makes the most of his minutes. Damian Priest is on this list, and I think I put him on the list because I think he is shown to be what the company hoped he would be. What I've always heard people believe in him. I watched Punishment Martinez in Ring of Honor. At times, literally the tallest guy on the roster. And it never seemed like they knew what they had with him. And I wasn't really sure what they had with him. And he got going later in life in wrestling. And when he ended up in NXT, I was like, all right, let's see how this works. And I remember his feud with Finn Balor. And I saw it then. And that was kind of his babyface run. And there was this feeling of, Hunter likes what he is. Sean likes what he is. I know he had always the backing of, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. And I think Waltman. Like, they saw it in him when they would visit. I remember being at NXT very early on in my WWE tenure when Hall and Nash were visiting, and Priest was there. Priest had come up to Raw a few years ago and really made an impression. They kind of messed with him, and I think they took away some of the things that got him over. But this year, where he's had to really take a front and center spot in a group that was really the main part of Monday Night Raw on a week in and week out basis. You know, to have to battle for that leadership spot sometimes, it felt like, with Rhea Ripley. But to connect with the audience during a world title reign that always seemed to get overshadowed by Drew McIntyre and CM Punk. But they were able to reposition him towards the end of that reign as a babyface, to find some sympathy, to talk about his upbringing. And yeah, he lost to Gunther, but that was the backdrop for the Judgment Day breakup. And then what did they do? They got him more over after being a world champ than when he was world champ. They put him with Rhea. They're getting big reactions. And it's not, look, Rhea's been, I've talked about this plenty, over and a big deal for quite some time. But Priest can come out by himself and also get big reactions. I think we've seen the evolution of Damian Priest. I think we've seen the elevation of Damian Priest. And I think his second world championship run, whenever that does happen, will come off way better. And I think while he has great presence as a heel, I just think there's something about him that, WWE fans especially seem to gravitate towards. His look is different. His demeanor is different. He has a great presence about him. You pair him with someone who he has natural friendship chemistry with in Rhea Ripley, and you have something there. And I want to see what this main event babyface run is going to be like for Damian Priest, because he has won me over. I throw Sami Zayn on this list. More often than not, Sami Zayn could be in the conversation for best wrestler of the year. Because I think while I wasn't super on board with him beating Gunther, I understand what they were doing. I think there is a very similar to Willow, to Mark Briscoe, even to Ospreay, just in terms of names we mentioned. There is a very likable element of Sami Zayn, the underdog element, wanting to see him succeed. If he's a babyface, that comes to the territory with Sami Zayn. And God knows he's going to have great matches. I was thrilled that he brought back the top turnbuckle brainbuster at WrestleMania. The right time to hit that move. A move we haven't seen since the days of El Generico. But to hit it on Gunther, to go, I got to do everything I can to beat the greatest Intercontinental Champion time. That was a time to do it. And as I have talked about, it felt like Sami's win over Gunther and subsequent wins over guys like Chad Gable, Bronson Reed, others, was to build Sami up that much more. So when Braun Breaker did eventually beat him, he beat someone who had even more credibility. He beat the guy who beat Gunther. He beat the guy who main evented WrestleMania the year before. He beat the guy in Sami Zayn, Braun Breaker did, who had been to as close to the mountaintop without winning the title. Sami, much like Chad Gable, is one of those guys that no matter where you slot him or what you ask him to do, he's going to come through. He has become such a confident promo, which I don't think gets talked about enough. Sami Zayn has always talked about wrestling being an art form. He has mastered that art form. Go watch Sami Zayn on Broken Skull Sessions. You want to see two guys connect that you probably wouldn't expect to connect, who came from totally different backgrounds, who came up in the business in totally different ways. there is a moment, and I think when they're talking about Knoxville and all that stuff, but there's a moment where Sami Zayn and Austin connect because they get the art. They get the psychology. Sami Zayn is a very nice person. He's a good person with a good heart. I know he has driven people nuts with how serious, how meticulous he can be about storylines, about match layouts. I think it comes from a good place, but he can be stubborn about it. But you can see what that mentality has brought him. I think he's having yet another great year. He's been put in multiple roles this year, and he's done his job well. And I think he has cemented himself as one of the star main eventers who will be there week in and week out, who will always have the connection with the crowd. And one more, and listen, once again, someone else who could be on the list every year. You know what? In another year, he probably is on it. Bryan Danielson. Everything he's done this year, stuff with Ospreay, obviously the stuff with Swerve, where we're going now, his whole story, blood and guts, you name it. Not blood and guts, but anarchy in the arena. Probably would be higher if he had more under his belt this year. I think I'm one of many who was kind of over Blackpool Combat Club being baby faces one week and heels the next. But I also know it's Bryan Danielson. He opened the year against Okada at Wrestle Kingdom. Bryan Danielson, who won the Owen, who had an outstanding match with Shingo Takagi, who got to wrestle in Mexico this year. If Bryan Danielson is active, he's always in the conversation for top 5 wrestlers. He's just off the list this year. So now let's get into it. Let's go to number 5. Not easy. I'm putting Swerve at 5, and I'm going to get some heat for that, and I understand that. I know Swerve keeps the receipts. Swerve won me over this year. I worked with Swerve in WWE. I know his booking was not always the best. I know people in charge didn't understand him, didn't relate to him. I think at times, and because of how he was booked and the DJ, not the DJ stuff, but the recording studio stuff and things like that, I think the company, as in WWE, and I think Swerve leaned into that too much. I don't think it made for a good wrestling character. Swerve's always been a great worker. Swerve has a uniqueness about him that's not like anybody else. I think there's a vile, angry side of Swerve that when it is presented correctly makes him the best possible wrestling character. I think we saw that at the end of 2023 with the stuff with Nick Wayne, with Hangman. And I think that got over so well and became such a interesting character that people started to cheer him, which is what happened with him and Hangman, basically, flip-flopping babyface heel. And Swerve has always carried himself, always Swerve confidence, like that's always there. That's always been there. Something that's only as the and winning the world title. Taking it off of Samoa Joe. And then, admittedly, not being booked correctly for the first couple of weeks of that reign, even though, he wrestled Kyle Fletcher right away. Then he wrestled Claudio. They put the right guy up against him in Christian. He's the right foil. He's the right heel. You'd believe he could do anything to win that title. And it seemed like we were heading for a showdown with Swerve and Will Ospreay for the world title at Wembley. And if you believe the stories, Will thought it was too obvious. Let's do it quicker. I don't want Swerve to come across as a transitional champion or whatever it was. Who knows what the truth was. So they do it at Forbidden Door. And I remember being like, wow. At the time, you could probably still argue this is the case, although they're pretty even. But at the time, I thought Ospreay was more over than Swerve. And I wondered if it was a good idea to put those two in the ring at the same time as you're trying to build up your first-time babyface champion. But they played into the story of Will Ospreay not being able to pull the trigger on the Tiger Driver because he injured his hero, Bryan Danielson. Whereas Swerve is willing to do anything, which is what he did and why he won. Swerve being part of Blood and Guts to really reheat up the Hangman feud. But then having to worry about Bryan Danielson, who wins the Owen over Hangman, who was able to get that match. And now we find out that Swerve can step up to the challenge, can step up as the main event of the biggest show of the year for the company with 50,000 people against one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, putting his career on the line. And Swerve was right there every step of the way. Having to bite, having to twist the knife. I thought the sit down he did with JR was really good. When he's like, why is this such a scary match for me? Why shouldn't it be a scary match for him? He's a mess. I could finish him. I could wreck him. I could end his career. When then they put Danielson's career on the line. Swerve was able to more than hold up his end of the bargain and was a believable, credible opponent to end Bryan Danielson's full-time in-ring career. I thought Danielson would win, but I truly believe that Swerve could, and that's the key. Swerve has leveled up. Swerve has been paid as such. And then they literally heat things up with him and Hangman. The darkest, deepest feud in pro wrestling. When we will see Hangman or Swerve next, I don't know. But the work he has put in over the first 9 months of the year absolutely deserves to put him on this level. And if you want to say he's higher, you're probably not going to get an argument from me. I have a tough time separating all 5 of these people. Number 4, as we stay in AEW, is Toni Storm. There is a commitment, and I don't even want to say it to the bit. There is a commitment to her character that goes far beyond the ring. There is a commitment to the Toni Storm character that people love so much because it is unlike anything Toni Storm has done before. The backwards hat, the glasses, the one eye black thing, the punk rocker, whatever you want to say. The world traveler, who obviously is known for her work in Europe and her work in Australia, New Zealand, all that stuff, and Japan and Stardom. And came into AEW that way, but then got set off by Wembley last year and going in a completely different direction. then not only she's gone, but anybody has gone in AEW. And having this, actress character from the 30s, the 40s, and obviously a lot of RJ City influence in that, and putting Mariah May with her. And, Mariah telling me on Busted Open, I was approached to sign with AEW with all of this in mind. And then they went out and executed it. And Toni became a babyface along the way. But she became someone whose promos you had to watch. Watch for the shoe. Finding weird ways to, talk about her bosom. Jokes about Wendy Richter. Speaking as if it's 100 years ago. But they put so much effort in, I always, to me, that's probably a character that's oddly pitched by, Vince many, many years ago in some alternate universe. And I wouldn't expect that character to be an AEW character. And I think the reason it did so well is because nothing in AEW was like it. God, nothing in pro wrestling was like it. But AEW didn't have such over-the-top characters. They still don't. But Toni stood out even more because of how over-the-top she was. And then she would, she figured out the gear a bit more. And she figured out, hey, I can still kind of wrestle like Toni Storm. I just have to be more theatrical and pose and this or whatever it may be. And the connection with Mariah and taking her in. And then being part of such an outstanding turn by Mariah and Toni selling that and the crying and the brawling and all of that just added up on top. And I think Toni has proven she's someone you have to sit up and pay attention to. I think she has shown layers to her acting abilities. She's always been a good worker. But now her matches are secondary, where they used to be primary. And I think that's exactly where you want to be as a pro wrestler. And that's going to come up with two of the next top three. There's two more names in this list where I'm going to have a very similar conversation about how their promos and their character work has become more of the draw of them than their matches. Not to say Toni Storm is having bad matches. She's not. But her character work, her promos, whether they're live on television or on social media, whatever, even her PR work she was doing for the Grand Slam Australian show, she's dressing a certain way. She acts a certain way. If you've ever met Toni Storm, she's a lovely, nice person, but she's not timeless Toni Storm all the time. But she's been able to turn that on. And by the way, shout out to her for doing it without Twitter. And she engrosses herself and those who watch her in her character. Number 3 is very different, although wrestled on some of the same shows as Toni Storm, is Gunther. I've talked about this a lot in really the whole year. Probably the most straightforward, believable wrestler this year. Presence, ring work might be second to none. His booking, and I will say once again, I don't think he gets enough credit for his promos, which is what has taken him, to me, to another level. Gunther has always been a great wrestler, has always had great matches. But I never felt like he was in the can't miss category, because I was always like, well, how would Vince book him? Is this going to be Evil Foreigner 101 BS? Will people potentially find him boring? You know how you make somebody not boring? You book them to be dominant and they back it up. You book them to be dominant against a wide variety of opponents. Sheamus, Rey Mysterio, Braun Strowman, Chad Gable, Bronson Reed. You make them into a monster because you know they can back it up. A rare, full-fledged heel who almost never cheats to win. The Miz. Sorry, I threw Miz in there. I don't know if the Bronson match happened, but obviously Miz. And then Sami Zayn at WrestleMania. Gunther last year at WrestleMania absolutely looked the part. In there with Sheamus and Drew McIntyre. His WrestleMania debut, you would have thought he'd been working on WrestleManias for 5 years. So he took that into WrestleMania this year. Once again, defending his Intercontinental Championship. And he took his first real loss at WrestleMania to Sami Zayn. And it didn't hurt him one bit because of how dominant he had been and because of his booking, which then took him into King of the Ring, which he would go on to win. Not to be King Gunther, not to wear a crown and a robe and carry a scepter. No. He won a tournament, the crown was a trophy, and most importantly, it got him a world title match at SummerSlam. And also put him in the position, once again, something that probably gets overlooked. By Gunther getting that title match against Damian Priest, Gunther was tasked with the beginnings of the Damian Priest babyface turn. His promos continue to be an underrated part of his game because they're biting. He's able to tear down his opponents after building them up. His words cut you. He puts himself on a higher level, A, because he can, and B, because that's how he sees himself. He did it to Miz. He did it to Chad Gable. He did it to Sami Zayn. He turned Miz babyface, believably. But he did it to Damian Priest, too. The street stuff and whatever, not the best material he was given, but he made it work. And they told that story of Gunther coming from the right upbringing, going through wrestling training as you're supposed to, becoming the best everywhere he's been, continuing to say the mat is sacred, protecting the mat, becoming champion anywhere he went, from NXT to UK to the Intercontinental Champion. He had everything to back it up, but he would make you feel like garbage because you weren't him. And you couldn't live up to that standard. And he pointed those words at Damian Priest. And people started to get behind Damian Priest. So even though Gunther beat Damian Priest and has moved on, he helped send Damian Priest on the path he's on now, which is as part of one of the most over acts in the company alongside Rhea Ripley, which is now as a main event babyface. Some of the best parts of Damian Priest's year have come because of what he did with Gunther. Because his world title reign was a backdrop, as I mentioned earlier, to Drew McIntyre and CM Punk. Gunther couldn't be number one on this list, honestly. I think he's the best pro wrestler in the world. At his best. And I mean that from an in-ring standpoint. That guy can't have a bad match. But I think he's added to his game with his presentation, with his words, with his presence. Gunther comes in at number 3. Number 2 will stay in WWE, and I'm putting Drew McIntyre on this list. Much like Toni Storm, I don't think about Drew McIntyre first and foremost anymore because of his matches. Another guy who can work, Another guy, when it's time to kick ass and do it, he does it. But Drew McIntyre has proven this year that he knows exactly how to use a microphone. He knows exactly how to use social media. And he knows exactly how to get the audience in the palm of his hand with any medium. That is a skill that is very hard to master and especially hard to do in 2024. The whole thing with Punk, you could say, started at Survivor Series last year when Drew supposedly walked out. When I heard about that, and I was working there at the time, my thought was, work. It's always a work first. But I also had known in conversations with Drew that he wasn't a huge Punk fan. And probably wasn't looking forward to any kind of comeback. That would come back around, obviously, at the Royal Rumble. Fluky thing, but because of an interaction with Drew McIntyre, Punk got hurt. Doesn't win the Rumble. Cody wins the Rumble. We don't get Punk and Seth Rollins for the World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania. Seth gets hurt. Punk gets hurt. So what happens now? Because Drew had multiple chances at Seth. Now, plans go up in smoke. What do? How do you make that work? The gloves come off. That's how you make it work. Drew McIntyre wins Elimination Chamber, gets the World Heavyweight Championship match with Seth Rollins, who's clearly not working at 100%. But Drew and Punk continue to go back and forth. Punk cost Drew the World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania from commentary because Drew finally wins in front of people, kisses his wife, and Punk messes it up for him. Punk not cleared, though, so they can't wrestle. You can do enough, but they can't wrestle. Clash of the Castle. Drew's got his chance, just like he had a couple years ago against Roman. Could he beat Damian Priest? Is it the right move to do? Drew still teetering. People who love him, people who hate him, people who love Punk, people who hate Punk. And I thought Punk was super heelish in taking out Drew the way he did with the ref shirt and low blow and all that stuff. Drew loses again. Drew dumps Punk's body in Chicago at SmackDown. We get Money in the Bank. Drew wins. By the way, Drew won the Chamber, the World Heavyweight title, and Money in the Bank in the span of a few months. Not that I need accolades, top 5 list, but that's pretty damn impressive too. And Drew had more reason to be pissed. And then we do get for SummerSlam. Because we probably keep Drew of my list. And Seth was too involved. And then it gets the intensity too. They fixed that fairly quickly. Heading into the strap match. They've continued to add on to that, heading into what they're going to do at Bad Blood for Hell in a Cell. But it's all really happened because of microphone and because of social media. Drew captivate an audience in 2024. He's the character as ever. And it all stems from a fluky injury at Royal Rumble and making far more than just chicken salad out of chicken shit. He's made a feast. He kept a feud going without someone. It's probably WWE as a whole for the year. Part of what the company's doing. And I think Drew deserves a ton of credit for that. I'm happy he signed a new deal. And I'm happy he is having what I think right now is the best year of his career. He comes in at number. Probably have guessed it by now, is Hangman Adam Page. Once again, it's no, I didn't. Think about someone who makes me think what I think about how that's not I think about wrestlers and characters who have depth, who can sell you with their words, who make their appearances mean something, whether it's 90 seconds or 60 minutes. Pro wrestling is about wins and losses. Of course it is. But the journey of winning and losing will send people on the highest of highs or the lowest of lows. And the journey for Hangman Page, which is really a 5-year journey, as I think the main character of AEW, hit those lows. And while he had his ups and downs with his friends with the Elite and Dark Order and the drinking and winning the world title and CM Punk, those weren't the lowest of lows. Those were not showing us everything that is Hangman Adam Page. Swerve pushed that out of Hangman. Hangman driven mad by Swerve. Driven mad by the fact that even though Swerve invaded his house, the people cheered him. Driven mad by the fact that Swerve couldn't be world champion. And while he had stopped it before, he couldn't ultimately stop it. And that pushed him. And then he was sent home, or whatever you want to call it. But he came back. He came back to get to Swerve, and he would do whatever it took. Whoever he had to be with, partner with, go through to get to Swerve, he was going to do that because he had to make things right in his own mind. If that world title meant that much to Swerve, considering what Swerve had done to Hangman, then Hangman would have to do anything it took to take that title, to take that joy, to take that prestige away from Swerve Strickland. And along the way, we watched the evolution, or de-evolution maybe, of Hangman Adam Page. Somebody put a picture up of him when he beat Swerve at All Out versus years prior. No scruff, younger looking, baby face, no beard, no mustache, no dark eyes, no evil eyes. A happier Hangman. And I saw those two pictures and I went, that is how you evolve in pro wrestling. And not just evolving to evolve, evolving to match what you're doing. Sinking yourself deep into it. Taking people on the ride. You don't get to see a lot of people in pro wrestling go through that. and not only go through that, but make you feel it. I get it. His family was affected. The man who affected his family, who threatened his family, is getting cheered, is beloved, is liked, is ascending to the top. How could this be? And that would drive Hangman more and more mad. And then Swerve got there. Hangman came back to get him. And he sunk deeper and deeper and deeper and went more maniacal and had such tunnel vision that he didn't care about anything else. And anybody who'd been with him along the way, forget you. You're just in my way. He has the right kind of tunnel vision in pro wrestling, where nothing else matters. And if it does matter, it's because it's getting in the way of his ultimate goal. You could say he achieved that goal. Swerve's not champion anymore, and Hangman beat him in All Out and beat him in a brutal way. And he let out that scream at the end. And he's coming for anybody that got in his way. Will that lead him back to Swerve? Will that lead him to the world title? Does he even care? We don't have answers to those questions, but I can't wait to find out those answers, because I can't wait to see what Hangman does next. And I can't wait to see if somehow, some way, despite burning a man's house down, sticking a needle through him, destroying him with a chair shot over the head in 2024, which doesn't happen anymore, is there a way to redeem him? It doesn't feel like it. But if someone can bring it back around, I think Hangman can. And that's why he comes in at number 1 of my top 5 wrestlers of 2024. Hangman at 1, Drew McIntyre at 2, Gunther 3, Toni Storm at 4, and Swerve at 5. Who do you have in the top 5? Let us know down below. Put it in the comments. Hit us up on social media at WrestlingMat23. Talk to us in the community tab at thewrestlingmatshow.com, where members can find their promo code to get discounted merch at prowrestlingtees.com/thewrestlingmat. Make sure you become a Matt member. See the levels right there, right above Todd, $2.99 a month. Matt Camper level $6.99 a month. Matt Event level $24.99 a month. Members only video for those second and third tiers coming out next week. Live reaction to the Mr. McMahon Netflix doc. We're going to be watching Raw or SmackDown or Dynamite coming up in the next week or so. Make sure you stay tuned so you don't miss any of that. And if you're listening on the Believe Network, thank you so much. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcast. But if you're only listening, come on over to WrestlingMatchShow.com. Take a look at what we got going on here. Watch the show. Watch past episodes. And if you only watch, go listen. Go subscribe. Subscribe at thewrestlingmatchshow.com. Subscribe where you get your podcast. Become a Matt member at thewrestlingmatchshow.com. And come back with us tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern, where we're here every single weekday, because I'll be back to talk about wrestling even more right here on The Wrestling.